The Nexus Prime Weapons exhibition was, without question, the most pretentious gathering of shop objects in the known galaxy. Every 3 galactic cycles, warriors from across the star systems descended upon this gleaming spaceport to wave their ceremonial blades around like oversized children comparing lunch money. The event organizers called it a celebration of martial heritage. Everyone else called it an excuse for species with too much time and too many credits to show off their fancy letter openers. The exhibition hall stretched for kilometers, its crystalline walls reflecting the light of 1,000 different energy weapons, plasma blades, and molecular edge swords. Vel'Thrai warriors strutted about with their curved talons gleaming, each claw inscribed with genealogical charts dating back 17 generations. The Kytherians had brought their traditional spiral blades that hummed with harmonic frequencies. Apparently, the pitch indicated social status, though to most observers it just sounded like a swarm of metallic mosquitoes having an argument. At the center of this magnificent display of compensatory behavior sat the tournament registry, where the annual trial of worthiness would determine the galaxy's most skilled blade wielder. The prize was substantial, a ceremonial title, a hefty credit transfer, and most importantly, bragging rights that would last until the next tournament. Warriors lined up in their elaborate armor, weapons gleaming, each convinced they possessed the finest edge in the galaxy. The Zarathian delegation had arrived with their champion, a 4-armed behemoth whose twin energy blades could supposedly slice through starship hulls. The ethereal conclave sent their finest, an ancient being whose plasma weapons existed in a state of perpetual flux between dimensions. Even the usually peaceful Andraxian merchants had contributed a contestant, though their warrior looked more like an accountant who had wandered into the wrong building. Into this symphony of metallic masculinity walked Zara Blackwood, human cultural liaison and apparent owner of exactly 0 shop objects. She wore simple black fatigues, comfortable boots, and carried what appeared to be a standard diplomatic satchel. No sword adorned her hip. No energy weapon hummed at her side. No ceremonial blade gleamed from a back-mounted sheath. The most dangerous thing visible on her person was possibly a stylus tucked behind her ear, and even that looked like it had seen better days. The reaction was immediate and predictably condescending. Conversations halted mid-sentence as alien warriors caught sight of this weaponless human wandering among their displays like a tourist who had taken a wrong turn at the gift shop. Whispers began in a dozen languages, all variations on the same theme. What was this primitive doing here, without proper armament? A Vel'Thrai noble, his claws practically dripping with precious metals, leaned toward his companion. Perhaps the human is here to observe? Their species is known for their curiosity about superior cultures. His companion, a Kytherian whose blade sang a particularly smug tune, nodded sagely. How quaint that they sent someone to learn from their betters. Though one wonders why they chose someone so unprepared. Zara, who possessed hearing far better than most aliens assumed humans had, smiled pleasantly and continued her casual stroll toward the registration desk. Behind her, the whispers grew more animated, speculating about human ignorance, cultural insensitivity, and whether someone should perhaps inform the poor creature that this was a weapons exhibition, not a cultural exchange program. The registration official, a bureaucratic Thraxian whose species had elevated paperwork to an art form, looked up from his datapad with the sort of patient expression usually reserved for explaining simple concepts to particularly slow children. Name and weapon classification for tournament entry, he droned, his voice carrying all the enthusiasm of a broken ventilation system. Zara Blackwood, human delegation, she replied, placing her diplomatic credentials on the counter. Entering the trial of worthiness. The Thraxian's compound eyes focused on her with the intensity of someone trying to spot a very small insect. Weapon classification. Standard human combat equipment. A pause. Around them, conversations gradually died as other warriors sensed something interesting was about to happen. The Thraxian looked her up and down with the thoroughness of a customs inspector searching for contraband. I don't see any weapon, Miss Blackwood. Zara cracked her knuckles with a sound like small tree branches snapping. The popping echoed in the sudden quiet, each joint producing a sharp report that seemed unnaturally loud in the crystalline hall. These are enough. The silence that followed could have been bottled and sold as a novelty item. Warriors throughout the hall stared at this human who had just suggested that her bare hands constituted adequate weaponry for a Galactic Championship tournament. Some began to chuckle. Others looked concerned for her mental health. The Zarathian champion actually stopped polishing his energy blades to gape at this display of either supreme confidence or complete delusion. The Thraxian official consulted his datapad with the desperation of someone hoping the rules had changed while he wasn't looking. Miss Blackwood, this is a weapons tournament. Participants are required to demonstrate proficiency with bladed instruments or energy-based cutting implements. My hands are cutting implements, Zara replied with the sort of casual confidence usually reserved for discussing the weather. Also crushing implements, striking implements, and grappling implements. I'm a very versatile toolkit. Somewhere in the crowd, a Vel'Thari warrior actually snorted with laughter. The sound was picked up by others, spreading through the hall like a particularly amusing virus. Here was a human, a species known primarily for their quaint diplomatic efforts and adequate catering, suggesting she could compete with the finest warriors in the galaxy using nothing but her biological appendages. The tournament director, an elderly Kytherian whose blade hummed with the authority of centuries, approached the registration desk with the measured steps of someone accustomed to resolving ridiculous situations. Director Vel'Thak, the Thraxian official began, relief evident in his voice. We have a classification issue. Director Vel'Thak examined Zara with the sort of careful attention usually reserved for potentially explosive devices. His blade's harmonic frequency shifted to what experts would recognize as polite skepticism. You wish to enter our tournament without a proper weapon. I have weapons, Zara said, flexing her fingers. 10 of them, plus auxiliary equipment. She gestured vaguely at her feet, elbows, and knees. All standard issue, all fully functional. The director's blade hummed thoughtfully. Around them, the crowd had grown larger as word spread about the human who thought her hands were weapons. Warriors pressed closer, some amused, others incredulous, all curious to see how this bizarre situation would resolve. The tournament requires skill with a blade, Vel'Thak explained with the patience of someone addressing a particularly confused child. I'm skilled with these, Zara replied, holding up her hands and wiggling her fingers. Been using them all my life. Never needed an upgrade. The laughter was spreading now, rolling through the crowd like waves on a beach. Warriors nudged each other and pointed, sharing jokes in their native languages about human arrogance and primitive fighting methods. The general consensus seemed to be that this was either an elaborate joke or evidence of severe human delusion. Director Vel'Thak found himself in the awkward position of wanting to maintain the tournament's dignity while not appearing cruel to what was obviously a mentally unstable human. After a moment of internal debate, he made a decision that would be discussed in warrior circles for generations. Very well. If you insist your hands constitute adequate weaponry, we shall allow your entry. However, I cannot be responsible for the consequences of your decision. The crowd erupted in fresh laughter. Several warriors actually applauded, appreciating what they assumed were the director's subtle method of teaching this presumptuous human a lesson about respect for superior cultures. Bets began immediately, though the odds on the human lasting more than 30 seconds in her first match were astronomical. Zara signed her registration forms with the casual air of someone filling out a library card application. When do we start? Preliminary rounds begin at the next cycle, Vel'Thak informed her. I trust you'll use the intervening time to reconsider your equipment choices. Nah, I'm good, Zara said, shouldering her diplomatic bag. Thanks for the accommodation. As she walked away, the laughter followed her like a particularly persistent echo. Warriors throughout the hall shook their heads in amazement at human foolishness, already composing the stories they would tell about the day they witnessed a human try to fight energy blades with her bare hands. What none of them bothered to research, because why would they, was exactly what human hands were capable of when properly applied. The first preliminary match was scheduled in the exhibition's combat arena, a circular platform surrounded by energy barriers and observation decks. The crowd that gathered was substantially larger than usual, word having spread about the human who thought her fists were weapons. Warriors arrived expecting entertainment of the sort usually reserved for comedy programs. Zara's opponent was a young Vel'Thrai warrior named Krex, whose claws had been sharpened to molecular edges and inscribed with victory prayers in 17 different languages. He was considered a rising star among his people, deadly, precise, and absolutely convinced that this match would last approximately as long as it took him to close the distance between them. The referee, another Thraxian with an official-sounding title, explained the rules to both combatants. The match would continue until one warrior yielded, was incapacitated, or was forced outside the combat circle. Lethal force was prohibited, though significant injury was considered an occupational hazard. Contestants ready, the referee called. Krex dropped into a combat crouch, his claws extending with a sound like knives being unsheathed. His stance was textbook perfect, the result of years of training in traditional Vel'Thrai combat forms. Across from him, Zara stood casually, hands loose at her sides, looking for all the world like someone waiting for public transportation. Begin. Krex launched himself forward with the speed and grace of a predator. His claws swept in a classic disemboweling arc, designed to open his opponent from sternum to pelvis. It was a beautiful attack, technically flawless, and it would have worked perfectly against any conventionally armed opponent. Zara wasn't conventionally armed. She sidestepped the charge with minimal effort, grabbed Krex's extended wrist, and used his own momentum to flip him over her shoulder. The Vel'Thrai warrior hit the arena floor with a sound like a sack of metal utensils being dropped from a great height. The crowd went silent. Krex rolled to his feet, surprise and embarrassment warring on his features. No one had ever simply grabbed him before. Opponents were supposed to block his claws or dodge them, not treat them like convenient handles for throwing him around the arena. He attacked again, this time with a series of rapid slashing motions designed to overwhelm any defense. His claws moved in complex patterns, creating a web of razor-sharp death that should have reduced any opponent to decorative ribbons. Zara ducked under the first set of swipes, caught his arm during the second, and drove her elbow into his solar plexus with a sort of precision that suggested she had done this before. Krex doubled over, gasping, and found himself on the receiving end of a knee strike that lifted him off his feet and deposited him on his back once again. Yield, Zara suggested mildly. Krex, to his credit, tried to rise for another attack. Zara helped him back down with a gentle push that somehow left him flat on his back, staring at the arena ceiling and wondering how his claws had become completely irrelevant to the proceedings. Winner, Zara Blackwood, Human Delegation. The announcement echoed in a silence so complete it seemed to have physical weight. Every warrior in the observation deck stared at the arena where a human had just defeated a trained Vel'Thrai combatant without using anything resembling a proper weapon. Several spectators looked around as if expecting someone to explain what they had just witnessed. In the competitor preparation area, conversations had stopped mid-word. Warriors who had been sharpening their blades or adjusting their energy settings found themselves reconsidering fundamental assumptions about combat effectiveness. A few began quietly researching human physiology on their personal data devices. Zara's second match was against a Kytherian noble whose spiral blade could allegedly cut through solid neutronium. He entered the arena with considerably more caution than Krex had shown, having witnessed the previous match from the observation deck. His blade hummed with nervous energy, shifting between frequencies as he tried to analyze this unprecedented opponent. "I have studied your previous match," he announced formally. "I will not underestimate human techniques." "Appreciate the courtesy," Zara replied, stretching her neck with a series of pops that echoed off the arena walls. The Kytherian attacked with textbook precision, his blade describing perfect geometric patterns as it sliced through the air. Each movement was calculated, controlled, designed to funnel his opponent into predictable defensive positions where follow-up strikes could be delivered with maximum effectiveness. It was a beautiful display of martial artistry, and it might have worked if Zara had been interested in following the script. Instead, she closed the distance in a rush that brought her inside the Kytherian's guard before his blade could complete its arc. Her first punch landed in his midsection with a sound like a hammer hitting meat. The second caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. The third was a measured uppercut that lifted him off his feet and deposited him in a graceless heap near the arena's edge. The Kytherian's blade clattered across the platform, its harmonic frequency shifting to what musicologists would later classify as confused dismay. Yield. Zara asked politely. The Kytherian made a sound that might have been agreement, though it was difficult to tell through the ringing in his head. Winner, Zara Blackwood, human delegation. This time, the silence had a different quality. Warriors throughout the observation deck were no longer laughing. Instead, they watched with the intense focus of professionals witnessing something they didn't understand but suspected was important. Several had begun taking notes. The tournament bracket advanced Zara through 2 more preliminary rounds, each against increasingly skilled opponents who had studied recordings of her previous matches and developed strategies to counter her unorthodox approach. Each match lasted slightly longer than the previous one, not because Zara was struggling, but because her opponents were getting better at recognizing the futility of their situation before she helped them to the ground. By the semifinals, the laughter had stopped entirely. Warriors throughout the exhibition watched her matches with the sort of respectful attention usually reserved for natural disasters or religious experiences. The betting pools had shifted dramatically, though bookmakers were having difficulty establishing odds for a combatant whose fighting style didn't appear in any manual. Her semifinal opponent was a Zarathian champion, a 4-armed giant whose energy blades could allegedly slice through starship armor. He had won 7 consecutive tournaments, and was considered the overwhelming favorite to claim this year's title. His preparation for the match involved meditation, blade harmonization, and what appeared to be a prayer to whatever deities watched over warriors who were about to face something completely outside their experience. The arena was packed beyond capacity. Warriors who had been eliminated from the tournament remained to witness this unprecedented match. Even species that traditionally avoided combat sports had sent observers, drawn by reports of a human who fought without weapons and somehow won. The Zarathian champion entered the arena with the measured confidence of someone who had never lost a tournament match. His 4 arms moved in perfect synchronization, each blade humming with barely contained energy. He was a masterpiece of martial engineering, the product of a culture that had spent millennia perfecting the art of armed combat. Zara entered wearing the same simple fatigues she had worn for every previous match. Her hands were empty, her stance casual, her expression suggesting mild interest in the proceedings. She looked like someone who had wandered into the arena by mistake and decided to stay because the air conditioning was better than outside. Combatants ready, the referee called. The Zarathian dropped into a 4-armed combat stance that was simultaneously beautiful and terrifying. Energy crackled along his blade edges, casting shifting patterns of light across the arena floor. He was ready for war. Zara cracked her knuckles. Begin. What followed was the most educational 3 minutes in the history of galactic martial arts. The Zarathian champion demonstrated every technique he had mastered over decades of training. His blades moved in complex patterns, creating overlapping fields of energy that should have made approach impossible. He utilized advanced footwork, perfect timing, and strategic positioning that had won him championships across multiple star systems. Zara demonstrated that 4-armed opponents had twice as many limbs to grab and use against them. The match ended when she caught 2 of his wrists, used them as pivot points to swing herself around behind him, and applied what human martial artists called a rear naked choke to his neck. The Zarathian champion, for all his skill and weaponry, discovered that energy blades were remarkably ineffective against an opponent who was standing directly behind him with her arm around his throat. "Yield," she suggested, her voice conversational despite the physical exertion. The Zarathian champion, faced with the choice between consciousness and pride, chose consciousness. His blades powered down as he tapped out, ending 7 consecutive tournament victories and launching 1,000 debates about the nature of effective combat. Winner, Zara Blackwood, human delegation. Championship match to follow after rest period. The silence that greeted this announcement had evolved beyond simple surprise into something approaching religious awe. Warriors throughout the observation deck stared at the arena where a human had just defeated the galaxy's most feared combatant using nothing but her biological appendages and what appeared to be a comprehensive understanding of leverage. The final match would be against an ethereal champion, an ancient being whose plasma weapons existed in a state of quantum flux between dimensions. They were considered the tournament's true test, an opponent whose very existence challenged conventional understanding of combat physics. During the rest period, Zara sat in the competitor preparation area drinking water and ignoring the dozens of warriors who found excuses to walk past her station. Some were studying her movements, trying to understand her techniques. Others were simply trying to confirm that she was, indeed, just a human with no visible weapons or enhancements. A young Velthari warrior, perhaps inspired by her victories over his species representative, approached with the sort of careful respect usually reserved for handling explosives. "Miss Blackwood," he began, his claws retracted in a gesture of peaceful intent, "may I ask, how do you fight without proper weapons?" Zara looked up from her water bottle, considering the question. "What makes you think I don't have proper weapons?" "But, you carry no blade, no energy weapon, no traditional armament." "I carry 206 bones, over 600 muscles, and a brain that's been solving problems for longer than your species has had space travel," she replied matter-of-factly. "Plus about 60,000 miles of blood vessels, which might not sound impressive until someone interrupts their operation." The young warrior stared at her with the expression of someone whose worldview was undergoing rapid reconstruction. Your bones are weapons." "Everything's a weapon if you use it right," Zara said, standing and stretching. "Bones make excellent levers and impact points. Muscles provide power and control. Joints create fulcrums for throws and breaks. Blood vessels, well, they are more of a design weakness in other people." "But how do you cut without a blade?" Zara held up her hand, fingers extended. "Ever seen what fingernails can do to soft tissue? Or what happens when you concentrate force through a knuckle onto someone's pressure points?" She demonstrated by pressing gently against a spot on his arm. The Velthari warrior jerked back, his entire arm going numb. "I don't understand," he said. Flexing his fingers, a sensation returned. "That's because your people have been so focused on building better swords that you forgot the most important weapon was always attached to the handle," Zara explained. "Every species in this tournament has invested centuries in perfecting their tools while ignoring the platform those tools operate from. You've got razor claws that can cut through steel, but you never learned how to use your body weight effectively. The Kytherians have blades that sing in perfect harmony, but their footwork is all wrong for actual combat. The Zarathians have 4 arms, and they use them like they are one arm with extra attachments." The young warrior looked confused. "But surely advanced weapons are superior to primitive biological functions." "Advanced weapons require training, maintenance, and can be taken away or broken," Zara said, finishing her water. "Biological functions just require understanding and practice. Plus, they are always available. I've never had to worry about my fist running out of power or my elbow getting confiscated at customs." As if to demonstrate, she performed a series of stretching exercises that looked simultaneously casual and impossibly fluid. Each movement flowed into the next, and the young Velthari found himself recognizing patterns that reminded him of combat forms, but simplified and somehow more efficient. "Time for the championship match," the arena announcer called. Zara stood, rolling her shoulders and loosening her neck. Time to see if the galaxy's ready to update its definition of advanced warfare. The championship arena had been expanded to accommodate the unprecedented crowd. Warriors, diplomats, and observers from across the galaxy had gathered to witness this historic match. Never before had a human reached the tournament final, let alone one fighting without traditional weapons. The ethereal champion entered in a display of light and energy that defied several laws of physics. Their form shifted between states of matter, sometimes solid, sometimes gaseous, occasionally existing as pure energy patterns that hurt to look at directly. Their weapons weren't held so much as manifested, plasma blades that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. They were, by any reasonable measure, the most dangerous opponent in the galaxy. Zara entered wearing the same black fatigues and comfortable boots, hands empty, expression alert but unworried. She looked like a maintenance worker who had been called to fix a problem and was confident she had the right tools for the job. Championship match between ethereal Nexa defending champion, and Zara Blackwood, human delegation, the referee announced. Standard tournament rules apply. Match continues until yield or incapacitation. The ethereal spoke in harmonics that bypassed the ear and spoke directly to the brain. Their words carried the weight of eons and the authority of beings who existed beyond conventional spacetime. Human, you have exceeded all expectations to reach this moment. I offer respect for your accomplishments, though they will not preserve you in the final test. Appreciate the courtesy, Zara replied, cracking her knuckles. Let's see what you've got. Combatants ready. The ethereal's form solidified into something approximating humanoid, though their edges remained fuzzy and their plasma blades cast no shadows. They were ready to demonstrate why they had won 12 consecutive championships. Zara dropped into a fighting stance that looked like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. It was simultaneously relaxed and coiled, balanced and mobile, suggesting she could move in any direction without telegraphing her intent. Begin. The ethereal attacked with weapons that existed partially outside reality, blades that could cut through space itself and leave tears in the dimensional fabric. They moved with the speed of thought and the precision of quantum mechanics, creating attack patterns that should have overwhelmed any physical opponent. Zara did something no previous opponent had attempted. She treated the ethereal like they were bound by the same physics as everyone else. When the plasma blades swept toward her, she ducked under them and closed distance. When the ethereal shifted to energy form, she waited for them to re-solidify and was ready with a combination that targeted their center of mass. When they attempted to phase through her attacks, she adjusted her timing and caught them in transition states where they were vulnerable to physical contact. The match became a demonstration of adaptability versus power, flexibility versus overwhelming force. The ethereal commanded energies that could reshape matter and bend space. Zara commanded an understanding of leverage, timing, and the universal constants that governed how matter interacted with matter. For the first time in any recorded match, the ethereal champion was forced to retreat, their plasma weapons unable to connect with an opponent who refused to fight according to conventional parameters. Zara pressed forward, not recklessly, but with the calculated aggression of someone who understood that the initiative was everything in combat. The end came suddenly. The ethereal, overextended in an attempt to overwhelm her with raw power, found themselves caught mid-phase by a perfectly timed grappling technique that somehow worked despite their quantum nature. Zara applied what appeared to be a simple joint lock, but one that affected the ethereal's ability to maintain dimensional coherence. For a moment, the most powerful warrior in the galaxy found themselves subject to the same physics that governed everyone else, held in place by nothing more complex than applied leverage and an understanding of how joints worked under stress. Yield, Zara suggested politely. The ethereal, faced with the novel experience of being physically helpless, made a sound like stellar wind through cosmic dust that everyone present understood meant surrender. Winner, Zara Blackwood, Human Delegation. New Galactic Champion. The arena erupted not in cheers, but in something closer to stunned reverence. Warriors throughout the galaxy had just witnessed their fundamental assumptions about combat effectiveness reduced to historical curiosities by a human who fought with her bare hands. In the aftermath, as Zara received her championship honors and the substantial credit transfer that came with the title, the galaxy began a period of intensive re-evaluation. Weapons academies started offering courses in biological combat optimization. Traditional bladesmiths found themselves competing with human martial arts instructors. Several species initiated diplomatic overtures specifically to request training exchanges. The tournament of worthiness continued, but the rules were expanded to include biological weapons systems as a legitimate category. Subsequent tournaments featured a much more diverse range of combat styles, though none quite achieved Zara's casual dominance over opponents who had spent lifetimes perfecting their blade work. During the closing ceremonies, Director Velthak approached Zara with the sort of respectful attention he had previously reserved for ancient artifacts and volatile explosives. "Miss Blackwood," he said, his blade humming with what experts recognized as profound respect, "I must ask, how did you know that your hands would be sufficient for galactic-level competition?" Zara, polishing her new championship trophy with the sleeve of her fatigues, considered the question. Around them, the greatest warriors in the galaxy waited for her answer with the attention usually reserved for religious pronouncements or stock market predictions. "Well," she said finally, "humans have been solving problems with our hands for a few million years. We built tools, sure, but we never forgot that the most important tool was the one holding all the others." She held up her hands, wiggling her fingers in the light from the ceremonial energy displays. "Every other species I fought today made the same mistake. They got so excited about their advanced weapons that they forgot the basics. Leverage, balance, timing. Force multiplication. Physics doesn't care how fancy your sword is if you don't know how to use the body that's swinging it. Director Velfax, blade shifted to a frequency that indicated deep thought. You are suggesting that we have overcomplicated combat. I'm suggesting you forgot that every weapon is only as good as the warrior using it, Zara replied. And the best warriors understand that they don't need to carry their weapons because they are their weapons. The assembled crowd absorbed this philosophy with a sort of careful attention usually reserved for potentially explosive revelations. Several warriors began examining their own hands with new interest, as if seeing them for the first time. As the ceremonies concluded and the galaxy's greatest fighters dispersed to spread word of this unprecedented tournament, one fact became abundantly clear. The definition of advanced warfare had been updated, and humans had written the new specifications. Somewhere in the crowd, a young warrior who had watched every match made a note to investigate human martial arts training programs. He had the distinct feeling that the galaxy was about to become a much more interesting place, and he wanted to be prepared for whatever came next. After all, if a human could dominate a tournament full of energy blades and quantum weapons, using nothing but her biological appendages, what other assumptions about superior technology might be worth reconsidering? The laughter that had greeted Zara's initial registration had long since faded, replaced by the sort of thoughtful silence that indicated civilizations in the process of updating their fundamental assumptions about reality. They had laughed that she carried no blade. Now they understood that she had been carrying better weapons all along. She had just been polite enough not to mention it until someone asked for a demonstration.